I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Sovereign Order of Malta. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies and distinguished colleagues, among the global humanitarian issues the international community faces, one of the most pressing is the fight against poverty. We see this when, according to the United Nations, 85% of the world lives on less than $30 per day, with a further 2/3 living on less than $10 per day. The war in Ukraine, the rise in inflation, and, ultimately, the lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic give us good reason to predict that a further 75 to 95 million people will be living in extreme poverty by the end of 2022 when compared to pre-COVID projections. The consequences of the pandemic on the most vulnerable have undermined the growing inequalities that mark today's shared development goals. Likewise, it is possible that the pandemic has exacerbated disparities in how countries manage emergencies and its effects. The relationship between economics and social justice has never been closer, accelerated by the development of communication systems. Thus, the need to maintain a healthy relationship between the two should continue to be one of the main priorities that we, at the United Nations, work towards. Sadly, the Secretary General was correct when stating at the 2022 High-Level Political Forum of ECOSOC that our geopolitical system was designed to continuously protect developed and powerful countries at the expense of the most vulnerable and underdeveloped ones. Not only is extreme poverty prevalent amongst nations facing war, conflict, or the dramatic effects of climate change, but it is also deeply rooted within developing countries impeded by historical exploitation and neglect. Considering this, for example, many social protection systems are not ensuring female income security and access to personal income, especially single mothers, who need a secure lifeline and, most importantly, a social service infrastructure to take care of their children. According to the United Nations, in 2015, 122 women aged 25 to 34 lived in poverty for every 100 men of the same age group, and more than 160 million children are at risk of continuing to live in extreme poverty by 2030. Ending poverty in all of its forms across the world for every citizen is the first of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Together, we must continue to work on the implementation of these shared goals while also ensuring the equitable distribution of resources and the right of each person to a good and fair chance at life. This includes not only the material and monetary forms of poverty, but also cultural or social poverty arising from limited education, exclusion, and social discrimination. To quote His Holiness Pope Francis, "There is a scandalous growth of poverty in broad sectors of society throughout our world. Faced with this scenario, we cannot remain passive, much less resigned. To all these forms of poverty, we must respond with a new vision of life and society." Mr. Special Rapporteur, how can we, as an international community, effectively respond with a new vision for a more equitable distribution of wealth? We must act and save the people who are increasingly left behind in both developing and developed countries. I thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Sovereign Order of Malta.